All right, let's dive into a really fascinating constitutional showdown from the Philippines, a case that put one single critical question front and center for the entire country. And this is the question, right here. Can a president, on their way out the door, pick the most powerful judge in the land? This wasn't just a political squabble. It was a legal battle that pitted two parts of the Constitution directly against each other. The stakes couldn't have been higher. And just look at this timeline. It is incredibly tight. You've got the presidential election, and then, boom, just a week later, the Chief Justice retires. But the outgoing president is still in office until the end of June. So you've got this tiny, chaotic window that created a massive constitutional headache. So here's how we're going to untangle this whole thing. We'll start with that ticking clock, then look at the two constitutional rules that were on a collision course. We'll break down the arguments for and against the appointment, and then, of course, the big one, what the Supreme Court decided and why it still matters today. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's early 2010. The Chief Justice, Renato Puno, his retirement is looming on May 17th. And this isn't just any retirement. It's happening smack in the middle of a presidential transition. This one vacancy kicked off an absolutely furious debate across the country. But you see, the real problem here wasn't just about politics. The problem was baked right into the Constitution itself. You had two different sections that seemed to be saying two completely opposite things. It was a legal clash that was, well, pretty much unavoidable. And here they are. On one hand, in Article VII, the part about the president, there's this very clear ban on so-called midnight appointments. The idea is to stop an outgoing president from stacking the government on their way out. But then, over in Article VIII, the part about the judiciary, there's this command: any Supreme Court vacancy shall be filled within 90 days. So one rule is screaming stop, and the other's screaming go. Which one wins out? Okay, so let's start with the first side of the argument, the case for the ban. The people on this side basically said, hey, the rule is simple. A ban is a ban, and it applies to everybody, no exceptions. For them, the argument was just crystal clear. The Constitution says a president shall not make appointments, period. Full stop. There's no asterisk, no fine print that says, oh, but by the way, judges don't count. It's an absolute ban. And they built their case on a few key pillars. First, just the plain text of the Constitution, which makes no exceptions. Second, they had history on their side. A previous Supreme Court case called Valenzuela had already said this ban applies to judges. Third, they pointed to the whole reason for the ban in the first place, to stop last-minute political games. And finally, their big point was that keeping elections fair and clean is just more important than rushing to fill a court seat. And this quote right here from that earlier Valenzuela ruling, it really sums up their entire viewpoint. They're basically saying, look, we'd rather have a short-term vacancy on the court than risk compromising the integrity of our elections. It's all about priorities. But of course, that was only one side of the story. On the flip side, there was an equally powerful argument that, no, judicial appointments are different. They're a special case. The whole idea here was that you just can't treat a Supreme Court justice like you treat a cabinet secretary. The process for choosing them is different, the purpose is different, and even where the rules are written in the Constitution is totally separate. And their case was also built on four main points. First, the structure of the Constitution itself. The ban is in the President's section, but the duty to fill vacancies is in the Judiciary section. That separation, they argued, was on purpose. Second, the process. The Judicial and Bar Council, or JBC, already exists to screen candidates and keep politics out of it. Third, the language. That word shall in the 90-day rule, that's not a suggestion, it's a command. And finally, they went straight to the source, the intent of the people who actually wrote the Constitution. And this is amazing. They had receipts. During the actual debates to write the Constitution, one commissioner asked point blank, is this a mandate, an order, for the president to fill the vacancy? And the answer came back clear as day, that is right. I mean, it doesn't get much more direct than that. So with these two powerful, constitutionally sound arguments heading straight for each other, what did the Supreme Court itself have to say? How did they solve this puzzle? Well, the court's decision was incredibly decisive. They ruled that the ban on midnight appointments does not apply to the Supreme Court or any other judicial post. The president didn't just have the power to appoint a new Chief Justice, they had the duty to do it. So how did they get there? They laid it all out in four logical steps. First, they agreed that the Constitution's structure matters. The specific rule for the judiciary wins out. Second, They pointed to the framers' intent, which we just saw was super clear. Third, they said the whole JBC process already solves the problem of political appointments. And then, and this was huge, they explicitly overturned their own previous ruling in the Valenzuela case, setting a brand new precedent. But look, this decision was so much more than just one appointment. It sent ripples through the government, with a lasting impact on the balance of power and the whole idea of what judicial independence really means. To get why this was such a big deal, you have to know about this core legal principle called stare decisis. It basically means stand by things decided. Courts should stick to their old rulings to keep the law stable. For the Supreme Court to just throw out one of its own precedents, that's a massive move. It means they decided the old ruling was so wrong that they had a special justification to fix it, all to protect the stability of the courts. And that leaves us with this final, really critical question. The whole point of the ruling was to protect the judiciary, to make sure it's never left without a leader. But does ensuring the court is always complete actually make it more independent? Or does letting an outgoing president make such a critical choice just open up a whole new can of political worms? That's the fascinating debate this case left behind. Thanks for diving into this with me.